pressure's on. All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Lots of wonderful, uplifting stuff. I'm going to tone it down a little bit, I think, over the course of this presentation. I met with Amy. I was lucky enough to meet with Amy for coffee periodically. And a few months ago we met and I was talking to her about the work that the Community Foundation was doing to respond to all of this stuff going on in the nonprofit sector. And she said, would you mind coming in to talk about all of that? Because this is really important. And as grant makers yourselves, it's useful to know as you go into another season of grant review. So I'm putting on something of a state of our local nonprofit sector. And short agenda. I will briefly talk about the Community Foundation for any of you who aren't familiar. I will give background on where we were circa June 2025 when NCCF decided to administer this nonprofit survey. I'll go through the survey that we administered and the results that came out of it. I will talk about what the Community Foundation and by extension what Rotary is able to do to meet the moment for our grantees. And then I will give some updates on what's been happening in the sector since the survey, because as you know, there's been a lot of movement when it comes to governmental policies. And I have Q&A at the end. If you have any questions in the middle, just shout it out. I do have extensive notes for this because I didn't want to miss anything. So if I'm not looking at you, again, just yell at me. It'll be great. Wonderful. So just as an overview, for those of you who don't know, the Community Foundation's mission is to address our community's needs by providing leadership on local issues, making impactful grants, and facilitating New Canaan's effective charitable giving. So all of that said, we have three kind of main pillars of our work. The first is direct grant making, getting money out the door. This includes our main grant cycle, which last year we distributed a little bit over $1 million in grants to nonprofits here in New Canaan and then also in our neighboring communities. But it also includes things like scholarships, which you all fund the Dorico Rotary Award. That's kind of piggybacking off of the Sapienza Scholarship housed at the Community Foundation. We issue grants through our Touch a Life Fund, so emergency financial assistance grants to individuals here in New Canaan and to programs like our partnership with the public schools that adds $30 a month to the meal cards of students who are on free and reduced price meals. So first pillar, just dollars out the door. Second pillar is housing charitable funds, which the lovely Anne just referenced. The kind of sexier version of that is the facilitating effective charitable giving piece. By housing charitable funds at the Community Foundation, we are able to serve as a resource and a partner to individuals and families who want to lean on the Community Foundation's infrastructure to facilitate their own giving, right? You open up a family fund and want to give dollars out in that way. But it also provides a home for other initiatives around the community that need to fundraise for their own projects or their own programs, but for one reason or another, it just doesn't really make sense for them to open up their own 501c3. So if you're familiar with the New Canaan Parent Support Group, if you're familiar with the playground they're building in Waveney Park, all of these projects that happen around town are made possible because they can open up a fund here at the Community Foundation and run their operations through us, and they don't have to file paperwork or go through an audit. Lovely. And then the third pillar of our work is our community leadership work. This is the idea that the Community Foundation has such a unique vantage point within our nonprofit sector. We're connected to over 100 organizations every year through our grant making. We work with a myriad of partners throughout town, right from the schools to human services, with local leaders to local philanthropists, individuals who want to make an impact. And because we sit in this very specific seat, we're poised not only to identify issues when they begin cropping up in all of these different spaces, but also to act as a convener and to bring people together around a common table when those issues are identified and when we want to tackle them as a community. No! Yay, okay, this at least didn't log us out. Ah, perfect. There we go. So between these pillars of our work, NCCF and really community foundations, just as organizations, take great care to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the nonprofit landscape, and to help direct programming and resources as needed when there's disruption. There we go. background on the current moment. And this is a moment right now where NCCF and funders across Connecticut and across the nation really feel the sector suffering. So I wanted to walk you through kind of semi-chronologically these challenges that the nonprofit sector has seen within the last year or so. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about was nonprofit workforce challenges. Throughout 2023 and 2024, and so we're talking like kind of post-pandemic, but before all of these shifts that we're seeing now on the side of our government, the number one issue facing the nonprofit sector was the workforce. This should come as no surprise, but the sector as a whole tends to be under-resourced, which means that many nonprofits are kind of forced to test the bandwidth of their staff in order to maximize their impact of the dollars that they're able to get in. This leads to nonprofit staff being overworked, undercompensated, and burning out. So it was a huge issue about 12 or 15 months ago, particularly at the executive level, where we saw an unprecedented number of leadership transitions that had the sector pretty worried. Locally, in particular, when we're talking about the nonprofit workforce, in Lower Fairfield County, one of our greatest challenges is staffing nonprofits given the high cost of housing and the high cost of living in the area. It is a sad truth that our homeless outreach coordinators, the people working in our soup kitchens, a lot of our workers are oftentimes clients of the same organizations that write their paychecks because the organizations cannot afford to pay them a living wage for this area. So that's nonprofit workforce. The second that I wanted to mention is inflation, and honestly I could have included tariffs in here and called it just high cost of goods, right? But the high cost of goods, and particularly the cost of food, which is up 30% across Connecticut since 2019, and we'll get a little bit more into that later, but that has really started to strain our nonprofits' budgets, just as it has for all of us as individuals. So this is true for our food pantries, right? At a high cost of food, it's going to cost more to operate. It's true for our after-school programs that have to bring in their own food, but it's also true for other organizations that you might not expect. There's a music arts organization that I was talking to last year who was saying that the cost of the instruments that they have to acquire in order to run their programming has gone up astronomically. And it came out of left field for me. I was like, who knew? So that squeeze that these organizations is feeling over time is also a little bit tricky. Okay, so workforce inflation. Remember, we're kind of moving semi-chronologically through this space. So now we're looking at 2025. Both of those things have existed for the last few years. The sector has been struggling with them. And now we're going to begin talking about the challenges that have come as a result of policy changes at the state and federal level. This is where I'm going to read verbatim off my sheet. It should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, that NCCF is nonpartisan, data-driven organization. We seek first and foremost to take care of our whole community, and as an institution, we don't have political opinions, but our work and the work of our nonprofit partners is directly impacted by government action and inaction. So all the policies we're about to discuss are facts, they're happening, and we're not in the business of discussing why or the politics behind the scenes, but to identify and acknowledge the most pressing needs in our community and meet that as best we can. So I felt like I had to get a little bit of that out of the way because I'm not usually talking about tough issues. So I will try to keep this brief. But public funding uncertainty is that kind of third bullet under there. What I want to be clear about is that the word uncertainty is the operative word here. Most of NCCF's partners to date aren't actually in a position where they've lost government funds yet. But starting with that brief federal funding freeze back in end of January, early February, nonprofits have been in this incredible state of uncertainty and of anxiety. They don't know whether the grants that they've already been awarded, potentially even spent down on already, would be frozen or canceled. They don't know whether they could continue to rely on the funding streams that they had been awarded in the past moving forward, and entire funding streams that used to really bolster the efforts of our local organizations, thinking National Endowment of the Arts in particular, have all but been just eliminated. Others, like the National Institute of Health or grants that fuel the food pantry supply chain, have been significantly reduced, or they've changed their funding priorities, which leaves grantees scrambling to adjust. And it's hard. So government funding is, and has always had this reputation for being the most stable, the most secure funding that a nonprofit could rely on. And so this disruption has just been difficult for organizations who have grown to, like I said, rely on that stability. And they plan their annual operations around it. And so it's a little tricky. And this kind of funding uncertainty has a trickle-down effect. So organizations who are used to relying on federal grants are now quite nervous that they won't have access to those federal grants anymore. Organizations that might not receive federal funds, but they receive state funds, are a little nervous right now because they know that depending on what happens at the federal level, the state will need to reprioritize what they're interested in funding. So they're also nervous. And then organizations that may not receive any funding at all through the government, they are sitting here like, okay, if SNAP benefits are cut, if there's a real pressing human services need, what is my, I'll call you out, what is my land preservation organization gonna end up doing with our fundraising, right? How will that change our donors' priorities? Sorry about that. Okay, and then the last thing to touch on is those other policy changes that impact community needs. Now remember that we're still talking, circa summer 2025, and so we didn't know at that point what all was coming down the pike. But at the time, we were seeing some populations that were targeted. To the Midnight Run's point, we saw the criminalization of homelessness by way of executive order, and we saw a suite of divisive policies come in that were targeting specific groups, from immigrants to DEI to LGBTQ populations. And we know that our local nonprofit sector, which NCCF is here to look out for, a lot of those organizations are really looking to meet those needs of those groups. It's, apologies. Oh, there we go, sorry about that. At the same time, HR 1, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, was in the process, but we didn't know what that would look like in the moment. So again, it's summer 2025, NCCF knows all of these things. We know that the nonprofit sector is in a little bit of a tailspin. No two organizations are going through the same things, but we believe that our job at this point in time is to figure out the best way to meet the greatest need. So we decided to administer a nonprofit survey. We asked 4 questions on this survey. I'm only going to cover 3 of them because the last one didn't give us any actual helpful material, and I know I have a limited time up here. But the first thing we asked was a temperature check, just asking organizations, how are you doing? Scale of 1 to 5. Second thing that we asked organizations to do was identify the top challenges they felt they were up against. And then the third question we asked was how NCCF, which is really a stand-in for any funder, including the Rotary Club, could be most supportive of their efforts in this moment. We received 66 responses, so approximately half of NCCF's current partners in any given year. And I looked at your grantee list from your 2025 grants, and while it doesn't represent like every single one, a lot of them did fill out this survey. So when you're looking at these numbers, just know that your organizations are reflected back in that. Okay, so I feel bad I keep looking at Leo. I feel so bad because he's already seen this whole presentation. He's on our Community Investments Committee. So jump in if you have anything to add, Leo. So the first question we asked was this general kind of scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing? It was phrased in overall, how do you think your organization is faring right now, with 1 being we are struggling and 5 being we are in great shape. We want to acknowledge that this question is really broad and it is a point in time question. So really, there's so many factors that go into which number an organization selects, how organizations respond, who is filling out the survey, what was it on a particularly good or bad day. We hope this isn't the case, but it's also worth asking whether these organizations feel, even if they really think they're a 2 on the scale, should I be putting a 3 or a 4 because our funder is asking us to fill this out. We want to have make the impression that we're doing well as an organization. So we do want to kind of acknowledge that we're taking this answer with a little bit of a grain of salt. And we actually did find examples of organizations who filled out this question rated themselves as a 4 or a 5, and then when we got further along in the survey and we got to the specifics of, what is this organization actually going through, we saw some really concerning things. And so this whole question is, I think, an interesting point in time, but it's not something that we're going around and I guess assigning a value to. So it's an interesting piece of data, but we encourage you to take it with a grain of salt. And the real benefit to asking this question is that if we do decide to re-administer the survey over time, this can be our baseline, right? We can see if in a year from now our organizations are generally doing better or worse now that we have this data in front of us. The second question we asked was about the major challenges that organizations reported experiencing. Each organization could select up to 3 challenges. NCCF provided a list, those 5 up top: fundraising challenges, staffing, changes to public funding, community needs shifting, and technology and infrastructure needs. We also offered like an other tab so organizations could go and fill out something that wasn't included up top. And this was a really interesting one. So as you can see, the most common selected option was fundraising challenges. That's targeted towards philanthropy, so grant makers like the Rotary and NCCF, and individuals. That kind of is aligned with what we understood going into this process, knowing that the competition for individual donations, there's a feeling that is becoming more competitive. And yeah, so the 67% reported that their challenge they are up against is fundraising challenges. 50% reported staffing as being a major challenge, and 47 reported changes to public funding. One of the really interesting things to come out of this question is that the most common kind of other challenge reported was related to physical spaces that organizations live in. So we had 5 organizations independently report, right? It was a write-in option, so they all chose to put it in, that they're actively either looking for a new space, struggling to maintain an old facility that's falling apart, or that they have simply outgrown the space that their facility is in. Their programming is bursting at the seams, but they don't have a place to go to. And so that's something that wasn't necessarily on our radar, but now it is, and it's really good to know. Great. Sorry, this is my smallest slide. It doesn't get smaller, I promise. And our 4th question was asking about the kinds of support that organizations would like to see NCCF provide given the circumstances that we're under. Note that we didn't pre-populate anything, right? The last question we talked about, we said, here are the 5, and then write something else in. This was an open question. We had to go through all the answers and kind of pull out trends. But as you'll see, and this actually ended up surprising me, the number one thing that organizations were asking for from us as a community foundation were opportunities to partner with other organizations, to build networks with other nonprofits, and to build community. We, based on their responses, which were a lot longer than what I've summarized them down into, we kind of think that this comes from 2 distinct places. The first is social. People want the opportunity to connect with each other during really rough times. Not to sound like a total Gen Zer, but the nonprofit community appears to be going through a collective trauma together right now. So building that community and having additional people to lean on is really welcome. The second reason is potentially more strategic, right? Organizations know that they may need to cut programming soon. They know that the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to making those really tough decisions for their own nonprofits is sometimes duplicative programming. Am I offering something that another organization can come in and offer, and can we lean on each other in that way? Organizations have a real interest in getting to know other orgs, what kind of services are they offering that may help my clients, may relieve some pressure from my staff, all of those lovely things. We also see that there's a significant interest in capacity building workshops or information sharing events Some organizations asked kind of generally for these offerings to be available to them. Others said, like, I need help specifically with adopting results-based accountability. Please help me with this very specific thing. And that's also good information to have. And I think that's okay. Others asked about for help identifying volunteers, particularly volunteers here from New Canaan, and getting to know the New Canaan community a little better. We had a lot of different options to choose from. So that was our survey. Those were the results. And luckily, this presentation isn't all doom and gloom, because there are things that NCCF is doing, and there are things that organizations like the Rotary Club can do to help our nonprofit community right now. We've offered a lot of one-on-one support for organizations who filled out the survey and reported a problem that we could actually address. We did not anonymize the survey specifically for this reason. So an organization could say, oh, but this is a small thing I'm dealing with, and we were able to reach out immediately afterwards and say, great, there's a solution out there, let us help you. So we made tailored recommendations, we answered some unanswered questions for them, and we recommended other resources or partners depending on what the organization's response looked like. We're also offering events to the nonprofit community to help meet the needs that were identified through the survey. So in December, we're bringing in the Department of Social Services, the State Commissioner Andrea Barton-Reed, to talk directly to our local organizations. And hopefully we're making this more of a regional approach, because she's, if any of you haven't seen her speak, please do. She's a wonderful speaker. She just did a podcast with Alec Baldwin, of all people, a few weeks ago about how Connecticut is responding to some of these federal changes, and I recommend it. It's really interesting. But we're hoping to regionalize that and be able to reach a ton of nonprofit organizations who are dealing with the increased need that's coming from some of these governmental policies. She can kind of open the communications channel with these organizations it gives them an opportunity to ask questions, and also really kind of point blank say, here is the timeline of how different needs are supposed to pop up according to what we know now, which will be really helpful for our organizations. On January 10th, we're hosting a volunteer fair in partnership with the New Canaan Library and a very unofficial group called the Volunteer Collaborative, which is a lot of organizations who get together periodically, maybe once or twice a year, just to talk about volunteer engagement. So that'll happen in January and will be really of great help to our nonprofits. And NCCF is planning to host a fundraising workshop in January as well. And in partnership with the New Canaan Land Trust, we're hoping to offer opportunities for organizations to send their staff on hikes throughout New Canaan, just as 45 minutes. Let's talk, let's build community, and let's hopefully create some potential partnerships. And finally, we're currently preparing to offer some other version of responsive grant funding and to meet new emerging community needs, provide capacity building to organizations with acute needs as they adjust their operations or revenue streams to meet this moment that we're in. How am I on time? Is that your cue to me that I'm ready? Because this is pretty much it. I think I'm good.
I have a hook here, but I haven't used it
okay.
in a while.
That's great.
Let's try and take a question. We'll have time for questions.
It's dark stuff, yeah.
No, you go on to the back.
One question, yes.
I'll try to make it a good one. What is the overriding theme of the organizations who are worried about their facilities?
Facilities, that's a great question. So we had 5 organizations respond and write that in. 3 of the 5 actually were organizations that are based here in town. I think that real estate and finding physical space to hold your programming is so limited and expensive when you're working on a nonprofit budget that a lot of these organizations have had to get pretty creative in terms of the brokering some sort of agreement with the town, leveraging donor relationships to try to squeeze into like the corner of a larger, corporate building, what have you. But 3 of the 5, I think, if my memory is correct, were based here in town.
John Angle will fix that.
yes.
Oh, right now, right now.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Okay, and right now.